Marks hunters are getting nerfs, but we're here to tell you why they probably won't matter. Meanwhile, Ret Paladins might actually hit harder than a wet noodle after some big damage buffs. And on the healer side, what the hell is going on here? Will the disc nerfs be enough to balance out the healer meta? If you haven't noticed by now, the start of the season is always complete chaos. Flavor of the Month specs are coming out of nowhere to kick the butts off of everyone else. It's hard to keep up. Even gearing is always a confusing process, but if you're a skill cap member, we've taken all the anxiety away thanks to our add-on that now shows BIS lists directly in-game, including gear, enchants, and gems, updating automatically each week. Skill cap members also get the latest talent builds for every form of content, evolving every week as the meta changes, which means you're never out of the loop. Of course, these aren't the only perks skill cap members enjoy, as you even get fully configured add-on profiles, which now includes 2-in-1 support for PvE. We've also got brand new courses on our website, including how to counter every class, the best positioning guides on the internet, and of course, the #1 class courses for gaining rating. SkillCapped has everything you'll need to hit your PvP goals. Players just like you are using SkillCapped to reach new rating heights. And that's because we continue to offer a rank up guarantee where we promise you can gain at least 400 rating while using our service. So what are you waiting for? Visit skillcap.com today using the exclusive discount link below. For now, back to the video. Before we get into class changes, we have a small buff to the human racial. Will to Survive will now share a 60-second cooldown with PvP trinkets, down from 90, but for healers only. Before this change, there was literally zero reason to play human as a healer in PvP, since your racial shared a cooldown with your PvP trinket. This change is most relevant for Holy Paladins, and doesn't really change the fact that Night Elf is OP for everyone else. But now let's swing over to the melee changes happening this week, and how they will affect the meta. First up is Survival Hunter, who got a long list of massive nerfs, specifically targeting Flanking Strike, which will spill over to the rest of their damage toolkit. Last week, Survival Hunters were doing insane burst with this single ability, which apparently set off the fun detectors at Blizzard, and as a result, Survival Hunters are seeing much more than just a single Flanking Strike nerf. After these changes, we expect Survival to clearly be the worst Hunter spec. As a whole, it will still be fine in Solo Shuffle and should see a decent power spike once the 4 set is available, but for now, it's going to remain on the lower end of the high tiers. On the other hand, Windwalker Monk was doing exceptionally well last week, and Blizzard has stepped in once again with another damage nerf, this time to Celestial Conduit. Overall though, we think we actually sandbagged Windwalker Monk last week, and even after this nerf, they still should be one of the best melee in Solo Shuffle. Celestial Conduit is just one part of the Windwalker burst kit, even having a dedicated PvP talent to make the monk immune to CC while it's active. But what might be even more broken than Slicing Winds and Celestial Conduit is Crackling Jade Lightning of all things. Windwalker monks have a talent increasing its damage by a ridiculous amount. If you see a monk channeling out this spell, you better interrupt it as soon as possible. Speaking of big damage, Ret Paladins might be back on the menu thanks to a fresh set of sustained damage buffs. Despite the fact that Ret is an absolute unit of defensives inside of PvP, its damage has felt a bit lackluster so far this season. These changes are definitely a step in the right direction, and we definitely expect some upward mobility for everyone's favorite pink Power Ranger. For now, we will actually move Ret Paladin up to the A+ tier, but as a bit of a wild card. And on the topic of wildcards, Sub Rogue's got an interesting set of changes, and while there's a lot going on here, the TLDR is that Sub has lost some of its Giga one-shot damage, but will now have better sustained DPS and more consistent bursts all game. The reason why this is so interesting is the fact that Sub truly relied on its one-shot to close out games. Outside of Shadow Blades, their burst wasn't super lethal. We think these changes will actually help Sub Rogue in the long run, especially in lobbies with other bursty DPS. So for now, we're giving Sub Rogue a promotion to the high tiers for the first time in a while. The last melee to see changes were Warriors, who are getting less crit damage thanks to a nerf to Champion's Might. We should note that this multiplier is only active for the duration of their spear, which means this nerf only applies to their cooldown windows. After last week's nerfs, we now think that Fury Warrior has clearly emerged as the better spec once again. Its sustained damage feels pretty crazy this patch, and is an absolute menace for some of the meta casters. That brings us to our updated rankings for melee DPS in Solo Shuffle. We've adjusted some of our predictions from last week, and right now, it clearly seems like Demon Hunters, Feral Druids, and Windwalker Monks are firmly in the top 3. The biggest wildcards this week will be Ret Paladin and Sub Rogue, who are both getting sustained damage buffs. Unfortunately for all of you unholy DKs out there, your spec still seems to be lagging behind. Now it's time to move into the range DPS and all the changes happening this week. First up, we have a weird set of nerfs to Marks Hunters, who are getting a pair of nerfs to passives on the Marks tree, with Tensile Bowstring and Unerring Vision on the chopping block. The reason this is so weird is that one of these talents isn't even being played by most Hunter players currently, since it shares a slot with Double Tap. That leaves Tensile Bowstring as the only true nerf to hunters this week, which doesn't directly nerf their burst damage, but simply will make it easier to shut down. You heard that right, the big hunter one-shots are here to stay, at least for now. On the receiving end of those one-shots will be Fire Mages, who are getting their damage nerfed for the second week, this time to some passives on the Frostfire tree. Both Severe Temperatures and Frostfire Empowerment are on the chopping block this week, which translates to less burst, especially during combustion windows. After last week's nerf to Overpowered Barrier, Fire is arguably the worst mage spec now in Arena, as it's lost not one but two of its recent gimmicks, moving it down a tier this week. And with all of those hunters running around, being the weakest mage spec is not fun, and that's not even considering the buffs to another natural predator, Elemental Shaman. Alarms went off last week at Blizzard HQ when it was revealed that Ellie was the worst Shaman spec. As any PvPer knows by now, this is not supposed to happen, which is why the devs stepped in with some very interesting damage buffs to Lava Burst and Lightning Bolt, and Ice Fury with a nerf to Mastery sprinkled in. We could see Ellie becoming extremely good this week, especially considering they have a flashy new PvP talent that makes casting Lightning Bolt worth it in the year 2025. We know we've been memeing on the fact that Blizzard is pushing lightning spells harder than an influencer running a crypto scam, but now might be the time to start investing in Ellie Shaman. Regardless, a 20% buff to Lava Burst is a really big deal, and with nerfs to Disc Priest, Ellie Shamans might feel super relevant again in Season 2, and will be moving up in our rankings. That brings us to our ranged tier list for the second week of the season. As you might have noticed, we've done some housekeeping since our predictions last week, spreading out the Warlock specs and swapping Arcane with Fire. We still think BM Hunter, Marks Hunter, and Affliction Warlocks will continue being the best overall specs for the ranged role, with Ellie being a potential contender. This will be the spec to monitor this week and could wind up doing exceptionally well, especially after the Disc Priest nerfs. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the changes happening to the healer meta this week. Resto Druid is the first spec to see changes, and will be getting a 5% overall healing increase, combined with some minor buffs to their new Ancient of Lore PvP talent. Overall, a 5% buff as a healer is a pretty big deal, especially for Resto Druids, since they are super reliant on their HPS. The buffs to Ancient of Lore are interesting, considering the fact that Druids might be better off playing without it. That's right, their flashy new PvP talent that provides CC immunity might actually be worse than good old-fashioned Incarnation. In any case, the elephant in the room this season is obviously Disc Priest, who are just dwarfing every other healer. Do we expect the buffs to Resto Druid to suddenly solve all their problems? Definitely not. But we do think that Druid should be in a much better position this week, even moving up a rank on our tier list. Another healer to see a decent power spike this week will be Preservation Evoker, who are getting a 20% buff to Dream Breath, which is currently one of their top heals. We already had Prez on the A+ tier, and we think this could be enough for the bump to S. Right now, Disc, Resto Shaman, and Preservation seem to be the top 3 healers by a significant margin. One thing we forgot to mention last week was the fact that Sleepwalk no longer has a cooldown, which is one of the biggest buffs possible to Preservation, helping solidify the spec as the #1 offensive healer. We expect the success of Prez to continue this week, where it will continue to excel in any lobby with super high damage. As long as there are no mages, Prez should be fine. One spec that will not be fine this week is Mistweaver Monk, who are also getting a nerf to Celestial Conduit damage of all things. Yeah, this one's a bit weird. Most monks weren't even playing Conduit of Celestials to begin with, and after last week's Jade Empowerment nerfs, monks are in contention for being one of the worst healers. Overall, we expect Mistweaver to feel very lobby dependent. It should continue to excel in environments with limited CC, but toss in some Sheeps, Fears, and ranged kicks, and monks will probably struggle. We've been talking about the elephant in the room for the healer meta, and now it's time to address the elephant itself, Disc Priest. Disc is seeing a long list of nerfs this week to Penance, Shield, Radiance, Archangel, and some Oracle PvP talents, with a few buffs to Void Weaver thrown into the mix. There is a chance that it will still be the best healer, especially once it has access to its 4 set in a few weeks. The reason Disc felt so dominant in week 1 is because it came off some of the biggest healing buffs of all time, and the fact that it's simply one of the most popular specs in the game. Seriously, it doesn't matter if Disc is good or bad, people seem to love the spec no matter what. So while these nerfs might sting a little bit, expect to see Disc Priest in most lobbies no matter what. But for all you hipsters or people with anime profile pics, don't worry, because Holy Priest is getting some interesting changes this week, including some massive damage buffs and a beefed up Divine Hymn. For solo shuffle, the Divine Hymn change is the most relevant, since you really don't have time to weave in much damage anyway, so we really don't expect Holy to suddenly skyrocket up the tier list. Ironically, the place where these buffs will probably help the most is the 2v2 bracket, where Holy Priest tends to shine whenever big damage is possible. So if you're bored of playing Disc, you should definitely try out Holy, especially if you want to crush the souls of your enemies in 2v2. That brings us to our updated healer tier list, where things are starting to feel slightly more balanced. Despite some nerfs, we still think Disc Priest will be one of the best, if not the best healer in the game for solo shuffle after having a massive lead in week 1. Resto Druid is definitely the healer to watch, as their 5% healing buff could be enough to elevate them out of the mid tiers. And if you want to rank up fast this season, you need to check out our courses on how to counter every class in PvP. We've also got the best positioning guides on the internet, and our famous class courses which teach you how to master your spec. We take concepts and break them down into bite-sized pieces, kinda like quests, but instead of experience, you gain rating. We've also upgraded our UI in Season 2 with brand new features including in-game BIS lists, and now complete 2-in-1 hot swapping between PvP and PvE. As always, we're continuing to offer our rank up guarantee, where we literally promise you will gain rating by using our service. Be sure to click the link below to get started with an exclusive discount for Season 2. For now, we want to thank you all for watching. See you soon.